boundaries are essential for healthy relationships. And healthy relationships then build safety. And we can't do that without implementing boundaries.
Welcome back to Smarter Wealth. This is the podcast where we talk about real life. We talk about real change and how to navigate it all without losing our minds. I'm so excited you're here today.
Thank you so much. You and I are normalizing the conversation around therapy, around mental health, about relationships, about self-love. I really appreciate that.
We are. It's a place that, thank God, our society and culture is opening up to, warming up to. It feels a little more like a cozy blanket than, a prickly pear. But I think we still have a lot of work to do to allow people to accept it and then want to dig in themselves.
We do. And this is a way that we can do that.
That's right.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, let's just start talking about healthy boundaries. I mean, relational well-being feels like sometimes a pie in the sky idea. It feels like very fluffy language, but it doesn't have to be.
Right.
And healthy boundaries feels very tactical, and real work can really be done. But I think accepting that and knowing when it's the right relationship or not, and knowing that we have the power to say what's healthy or not is super important. So tell me, where do you want to start? Let's talk about healthy boundaries.
Well, I think a good place to start would be recognizing that boundaries are essential for healthy relationships. And healthy relationships then build safety. And then that's how healthy dynamics stick. Once we establish safety with ourselves and with someone else. And we can't do that without implementing boundaries. It's often an overused word these days.
Yeah.
Maybe even used in a way that's not productive. Today, we're going to talk about productive implementation, healthy boundaries, though, and how that can really allow us to connect in a meaningful way, in an authentic way with other people, while we include ourselves in the mix.
So how do we first identify that maybe we need a healthy boundary?
Well, I think it's important to even roll back to a historical perspective about what were we taught. We have to understand why we show up the way we do in relationships to begin with. Why is that? Do I have boundaries? Do I see them as important or significant, or even for me? What did my family look like? What was my household like? Was I in an enmeshed dynamic where perhaps the relationship lines were blurry? What did that teach me about my needs and your needs in a relationship? Did I grow up in an overly controlled environment where I did not have a sense of autonomy and I couldn't learn to trust myself? Therefore, do I now in adulthood have relationships where I have no voice or no say? So we have to be able to go back and understand, was there trauma, emotional neglect, clear messages sent to me about how I need to show up in relationships? And is that healthy, and does that serve me today? If it doesn't, then we need to be able to learn how to name those dynamics and then make a case against them.
This isn't about blaming and saying, see, my parents, it's all their fault. We're all screwed up because our parents didn't know what they were doing. But then as a parent, I also take that to heart. I think,
Wait a minute.
Dear God, I'm doing my best here.
Right.
So leaning into understanding people are doing the best they can, right?
They're doing the best they can. I'm also a believer that when you know better, you do better.
Yeah.
I think it's wise to look back from a historical perspective. How were their influences shaping the way my mom and dad saw themselves in relationships and on up? And by doing that, we can do so in a way that honors just the normalization of patterns in our family dynamics without scapegoating.
Yeah.
And so when there's no finger pointing There's no blaming. There's just an understanding that some of these dynamics and relationships are bigger than me, are more historical than me. And so I can step away and depersonalize that process and just recognize we were just influenced.
Yeah.
This was normalized for us, for them, for those who came before them. And now I'm taking a look at them and evaluating, are they the healthiest dynamics in relationships? And do I need to take a look at implementing healthier techniques?
So Beth, talk to me about why you think as women, why do we struggle with setting and maintaining boundaries? I think, well, I'm not a man, so I'm not even going to step into why I think they do or don't do a better job sometimes. But in my experience as a woman, I think we tend to struggle more.
I think there are several influences. I will sort of start globally and work our way in. I think that it would be naive not to at least acknowledge the role of society and the influences that it has as a larger construct on women, young ladies, and teaching them who they are in the world.
Yeah.
So I think it's just really important to see that bigger, more global influence. Cultural implications certainly play a role about learning who we are and what our place is. Do I have a voice? Do I have thoughts? Do I have needs and opinions? Are those disclosed to others? Are they not? These are just typical cultural, societal expectations that we're taught from birth.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think that's just really important to acknowledge.
Just to start there.
And then moving closer into the home, there are the normalized patterns and ways in which we all work together in that family unit. The family members, the roles that are assigned, they're just assumed. Everyone knows it. Someone may be, the authoritarian. The other is the peacekeeper. There are lots of different things that we're taught in the home that allows us to assign certain things to ourselves. And then we take that out into the world with us. I'm not saying it's healthy. I'm not saying it's good.
Yeah,
it just is.
And as women, we are typically viewed more as a caregiver also, right? So being a caregiver lends itself to that.
Absolutely. And then you have the societal influences, the normalized expectations in the home. And then it becomes very defined about who are we as women supposed to be in relationships.
Yeah. What's the difference between a healthy boundary and a rigid wall? Because as we've talked about safety and flight or flight, and we're always trying to find that safety, a sense of safety, I feel like I'm the first person to admit I will build a rigid wall simply because I'm trying to protect this heart.
Absolutely. So when I think about rigid wall, that goes very concrete for me. And clinically, we really try to teach people to stay away from rigidity, concrete thinking, all nothing. It's a dangerous place, right? It will keep me alive,
right? Because
it's the known and I can navigate it.
Yeah.
If it's black and white, those are very clear things that I can navigate. Gray is scary. The unknown is unpredictable. No go.
Yeah.
And so I will find a way out. I will stay alive and I will stay safe.
Yeah.
But it will obviously create limits on my life as well as relationships.
Yes.
Right. So it doesn't come without consequence. This is where my southernness comes in to my advantage. I like to consider, instead of guarding my heart with a rigid wall, let's consider some chicken wire. And so if you think about chicken wire, it's open, it's breathable.
Yeah.
But it keeps the snakes out. It's some sense of I'm not fully exposed out into the world, vulnerable and ready to be attacked, but I'm not guarded so much so that my life is limited and small. Now I'll stay alive there.
Yeah.
Which, if anyone has endured trauma or emotional neglect, which the studies show up like trauma does, then we are automatically rewired for safety. So it doesn't shock me that you say that wall wants to shoot up and protect me. And it will, but it will also rob you of the opportunity for genuine, beautiful, healthy relationships. And so that will serve us until it doesn't.
Yeah.
And it's at that point then we have to reevaluate, is this really what I need? Or do I need to explore some risk taking on learning to trust myself, to use discernment, to find healthy relationships, navigate to healthy relationships? Can I trust myself there? And then can I trust others? Will you judge me? Will you reject me? Will you abandon me?
Yeah. So the fence or wall, whatever you might have, with the imagery, you might have a different type of fence with different people also, right?
Sure. In fact, a visual, which I do love a good visual, especially working in therapy. I really see relationships now, I didn't always, as having rungs. And so each rung has value. The further out you get from that inner circle does not mean that you have less value in my life. It means you have less access in my life. And people who have experienced trauma or traumatic situations or unhealthy relationship dynamics, sometimes we're either so guarded that we push everyone away, or the opposite happens and we allow everyone in at the same pace with the same space. And that opens up for you to subjugate your own needs in relationships. You become the yes person. That's exhausting. It can be overwhelming, very stress inducing. So learning that I can have a few here in this small rung close up, they're going to have more access and more space in my life. And then the further out I go, you're still important to me, but you do not have the same access. Now, there are some times where we might have to end a relationship after recognizing that the unhealthy dynamics just aren't serving either person. It doesn't always have to automatically default to cutting someone out in our life. We have the power and the authority in our life to use that discernment to decide, where are they in that rung?
That's great imagery. It makes me think about in a therapy session previously in my life, I was really struggling with breaking down that very rigid wall with my biological father, who I have a lot of work to still do probably in my life with. But I didn't want to break down that wall. I didn't want the breathable fence because that is a safety issue for me.
Right.
And my therapist said, you can have a fence. You control the gate. If you want to keep the gate closed, keep the damn gate closed.
And remember, trauma does not want you to know that you have choice. And so a trauma response will say, oh, no, you're not in charge. Once I realize I'm building the fence, I'm the builder.
Right.
I'm in charge. Then I have choice. Once I realize, how empowering is that?
Very.
To know that I'm in charge.
Yes. So talking about the wall and understanding the difference between that healthy boundary and the different rungs, how do you really identify the toxic relationship? Because sometimes we, as we've already mentioned, that can all too many times be the familiar, and we keep going back to the familiar, even though it's not serving us, or it is a very toxic relationship for us.
I think what we have to do is we have to go over to a place that might not be so familiar for us and learn about what a secure attachment style looks like.
Okay.
So we're pretty familiar with some dysfunction, some enmeshment, some overly controlled, whatever the dynamics are. Now we need to go hop over and take a look at a secure attachment is where two people mutually invest into that relationship. And by doing so, they build capital together so that not if, but when that relationship hits a bump, they have built a reserve together over time. A great example, I lost my parents within 18 months of one another after a very long journey of caregiving. I was quite foggy in my personal life for a long time, trying to navigate that, just natural grief and just the exhaustion. And I unintentionally double booked more than once. Clients showed me nothing but grace, nothing but understanding, nothing but compassion. And I truly believe it is because we have worked in our working relationship, which is also a relationship, to build that collateral together, trust, respect, importance, the value is there. And so when I show up and create a bump, even unintentionally, we're going to see ourselves through that because we've built into that mutual capital something that's so important. So I think the long answer, learn about what a secure attachment looks like. What parts do I possess currently in relationships? What is lacking? We're kind of pros at the dysfunctional, messy parts that we learned to normalize in childhood. Let's go spend some time learning what does the literature say? What do the experts say about what healthy dynamics look like?
And partnership, right? I mean,
it's mutual. And that's beautiful because for people who may have grown up in an environment where they feel they are responsible, and we will often see this in women, that it's our job to move relationships in the way that they need to go. That is not our responsibility. It's shared. It's a partnership. That's the healthy dynamic.
It makes me think about, I mean, just in a personal reflection moment, I historically, in my first marriage was scared to bring up certain situations or feelings about something because it was not met with a warm reaction. It didn't serve that person, or there was a whole multitude of issues as to why that person would react with a lack of warmth or caring. And in my marriage, my second marriage, we laugh about it now, but in the beginning of our relationship, I was reluctant to really talk about certain things because I wasn't sure how he was going to meet me. And he stopped in a conversation one time and he said, "The water is always warm." And today that is a pause moment in any conversation we have when we feel like, okay, it's time to level set. This is a safe place. The water is always warm. And we still, after years of knowing that this is a safe relationship, this is a deep partnership and the healthiest relationship I've ever known, I know it's warm, but I'm still sometimes like those weird dark corner of your heart and mind patterns start to well up. And we have to remind each other that, hey, this is warm.
And you bring up a good point because those default norms are conditioned. They're ready for you to use them. They feel comfortable, oddly enough. They feel familiar. And so they're just ready for you to pick them up. And nothing like, a partner, a long-term committed partner, marriage, what have you, to really trigger those default norms and swoop us back into the familiar. And then we get stuck on that negative cycle. It's very difficult to come off of that. She uses an infinity symbol. So once we get up into that, it's very hard to get off. And then giving yourself the gift of looking back. Did it even begin in that marriage, or was it just affirmed in that marriage? Were there other circumstances or relationships that possibly sent that message to you? You need to be cautious about what you say because it might not be safe, right? And so looking 100%. At those patterns throughout relationships for our entire lives, so much value, and looking at what are we repeating and recreating
Yeah.
in new relationships?
Yeah.
And am I just recreating old dynamics?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. Sometimes we unknowingly point the finger at our partner that they know our buttons to push when really they might not be pushing a button at all. It's just our own reaction to that yucky familiar that pattern.
Because we do tend to navigate to the known, to the familiar in relationships and find safety there, then it may not be an intentional trigger, but it is still triggering old responses, old dynamics. And so without even knowing, we will swoop back into that dynamic. And then our reaction will then potentially trigger theirs. And then that's when we get stuck in those negative cycles.
So really a self-reflection moment is really necessary to check in with yourself and understand why you're reacting this way.
Especially if you are in an actual negative cycle event. And something important to remember is that it takes at least 20 minutes for a human brain to come out of that amygdala thinking. So that is not a quick shift, and we need to learn to have some sort of timeout and allow ourselves to reset. And then the most powerful part, so many people forget, is to circle back around, not to re-engage in an argument, but to find resolution together where cooler heads prevail.
20 minutes feels like a long time when you are in that moment and I'll use an I statement. I have a point I need to make. I need to get this across. So what I'm hearing you say is men and women in that moment, take 20 minutes, acknowledge you're giving each other the 20-minute break that you need for whatever reason it is.
In any relationship, not just marriage relationship, not just romantic, long-term committed, with your children.
Oh, yes.
Teaching them this. Teaching them simple terms. I am upset right now, normalizing that as a human experience. I don't want to say things that will be hurtful or that I will regret later. I'm going to go take a moment, but this is important. You're important. And I want us to circle back and then bring your healthiest self back to the relationship and then seek resolution together.
I just need to sit there for a second. That feels so logical. I mean, right? Like, why can't we think of that in the moment?
It's introducing choice. And if you remember, if we're rewired for safety, especially if you have endured any sort of adversity or trauma in your life, and at this point, who has not, then we're rewired for safety. So there is no choice when we're only seeking safety. But if we give ourselves that gift of a few moments to reset, regulate, come back to a place of center where I have choice in what I say, where I can ask myself, what is my need in here? What is going on that I am responding in such a way? To have choice. It's powerful.
So in that moment, I've also read that just as simple as 3 deep breaths can help bring regulate your heart rate.
Because when we're in that amygdala state, we are in a very shallow chest type breathing. It's going to keep us alive. But it's not going to allow us to regulate. And so what we have to do then is remind ourselves, we're more advanced than this. We are actually not in actual literal danger, more than likely. Sometimes in extreme circumstances, but for the most part, we can help reset that back to a place of feeling and being regulated. And breath work is one of those ways. I love 4-7-8 breathing. The 4 second is a big belly breath. The 7, that breath retention, is where my brain says, what is she doing? Hold on, let's shift. And then the 8 is a great exhale, a cleansing of whatever it is that I might be experiencing in that moment. But the 3, the rhythmic breathing that you mentioned, progressive muscle relaxation, that's another really great way to holistically bring the body into what's happening and to center myself and to regulate myself how powerful that I'm in control now.
Yeah.
And I can bring that healthier version of me back into the conversation that was so stressful earlier. It does take both.
Yeah.
People being willing to do that work.
Mm-hmm. The big belly breath makes me just think about literally the big belly breath and putting your hands on your belly and breathing and allowing that diaphragm to expand and feel your belly rise. A friend of mine that is a yoga teacher and meditation teacher, she talks about the visualization of the way babies breathe. And if we think about the way a baby breathes, you watch their sweet belly.
Big belly.
Go up and down. And so as a visualization, I think about that too sometimes.
I love that.
Is really breathing into the belly.
It's not going to disrupt, the workplace or a classroom setting before an exam, or maybe a bathroom stall, my car.
Yeah.
Even in a conversation, these are things that I can still do if I'm finding myself dysregulated.
Yeah. Talking to my teenage daughter about that in the classroom, Lord knows, no more additional eyes on her than necessary, right? I don't want to cause a fuss. I want no other person looking at me.
We need easy, quick, and effective tools that we can use anywhere.
Yeah. Or, even in a work setting, when you're sitting around a table with senior leaders and you're in whether you're in the hot seat or you're coming next to add to the conversation.
I do not want it obvious. But I can do some quick tips, quick techniques that are going to help regulate my body and get me back to that place of center. And in dialectical behavioral therapy, we call it wise mind. And that allows my emotional brain and my logical, rational brain to kind of marry into that center. And it is there I have choice. It is there I have space to think.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk more about, so as we've identified toxic relationships and when it's time to walk away, sometimes there's guilt attached to that. Mm-hmm. So let's kind of shift into the feeling of guilt when we enforce some of those healthy boundaries, and how do we overcome that guilt and sometimes shame? But what else?
I think that it goes back to being able to reflect back on those historical norms within your family, even societal. What are the expectations for me and how I show up in these relationships? Why am I feeling guilty right now? Mm-hmm. So I need to find out what is that motivation behind the feeling of guilt. First, recognizing that guilt is just a normal, natural emotion. Then once we accept that, then being able to lean into, what am I telling myself if I begin to set boundaries in this relationship? What am I telling myself will happen? And why does that bring guilt?
Yeah.
And that could come from a lot of places. It's my role. This is expected of me. I don't want to disappoint someone. I don't want them to leave me. Yeah. I have paid for it in the past. If I have shared my need for a boundary, it's not safe. Yeah. And so many times people will then just stay in dysfunctional type patterns and dynamics in relationships rather than trusting themselves, using discernment, taking a risk.
Clearly, life is life and we have all these different relationships, but you can apply that to every relationship.
Every relationship.
Right? Whether it's a parental, a parent, a child, a partner, a friend, a coworker.
Yes.
A boss.
Yes. The relationships might look different.
Yeah.
But establishing healthy boundaries and understanding the dynamics, that is across the board.
Yeah.
That won't change.
What are some common red flags that we might overlook that tell us we probably need some stronger boundaries?
This, I think, goes back into understanding the holistic perspective. What is our body telling us? So when I'm with person A, am I feeling overwhelmed, exhausted, overextended, anxious? Mm-hmm. Am I changing and shifting and morphing into someone that I normally am not? Mm-hmm. So I think it's really important to be in tune with what is going on here and what is going on here.
Be in tune with your head and your heart.
So that then you can receive the messages that your body is trying to tell you about how you're showing up currently in that moment, in that situation. And it could be, I'm feeling taken advantage of. I'm feeling used. I don't feel that I can have a say. I find myself subjugating my needs. I don't provide my wants or desires or opinions. These might be signs and some red flags to look at. If I begin to change who I am and I can't show up authentically and expect you to do the same, we probably have some unhealthy dynamics.
Yeah. Yeah. I think all too often as women, we find that in a workplace. There are a lot of, clearly that happens in any relationship, but I can speak from experience too, from having a previous leader, that there was no room for my expertise or my opinion. I might be sitting at the table and I better be damn grateful that I got a seat at the table.
And so I think that's why it's so important to look at sort of the macro level and the micro level influences. You need to be grateful that you are here affirms a narrative that may already be on board. And so duly noted, you're right. I should just be grateful I'm here. I'm not going to call out issues or concerns. I won't rock a boat. I've learned not to. And so we continue to create these dynamics in various relationships, and that solidifies and affirms the beliefs that we have on board. It's why it can be so challenging to begin to chip away at those and to recognize that it's actually a part of the dysfunction. It's not actually providing us the safety. We'll stay alive, yes, but we won't be able to authentically engage with other people in a genuine way. And that's robbing us of something really beautiful.
It's well said. And, I think too, that's not just within a male and female dynamic, right? I mean, that can also be within a woman and woman dynamic. And
absolutely.
I love the movie The Devil Wears Prada. That's like one of my go-to movies if I'm feeling blank, whatever it is. But good God Almighty, the dynamic between, Anne Hathaway in that position and Glenn Close, that's a terrible place to be. And I think in any woman's professional life, whatever that looks like, maybe, it can be a million different things, but I think we've also fallen subject to other ladies in leadership or other lady coworkers that we have felt like we want to emulate and we'll never be good enough. We'll never be like her, or they want to make sure we are put in our place because there's not room for two of us at the top.
And you can blame society for that in terms of pitting us against one another and making sure that not too many rise up. And then we can, if we destroy from within, then we cannot, really come together unified and playing to one another's strengths and uplifting one another. I mean, that's quite frightening if we were empowered to do so, right? So we have to take a look at the broader, more global influences on relationships and women, woman-to-woman relationships in the workplace, and in family dynamics. Often you will see a lot of dysfunctional patterns because they feel threatening and or that comparison being the thief of all joy, for sure.
So let's make a pact, ladies, right? Yes. Girl code. Hey, we are here for each other. We're showing up.
This is a sisterhood.
This is a sisterhood.
It's time to start breaking down, some influences that are, hundreds of years in the making, at least here in the Western world and long before that. So it's time to start normalizing, uplifting one another, leaning in, connecting together, healthy dynamics and relationships.
Secure attachments, right? Not mean girls.
That's right.
Yes. So Is there a way that we can then really set those healthy boundaries without feeling like we're pushing people away? And do others necessarily need to know sometimes when we need a boundary from them?
Right. So the first part of that question, I think, is to understand what is my reasoning for feeling as though I'm pushing people away. So it could be that we need to dig into the feeling surrounding boundaries. If I feel as though I'm pushing people away, is that something more historical that in my belief system about I'm responsible versus I'm to blame, or am I allowed to do this? So some of it is about just going into your belief system about boundaries to begin with, right? And understanding that. Second thing would be to normalize that healthy love, healthy relationships require boundaries. We'll get better versions of one another in that relationship because of the boundaries. So it's all about re-educating and retraining the brain. If we were not raised to believe that boundaries were healthy and boundaries were good.
How can we set boundaries without feeling like we're pushing people away, or that maybe we don't want people to know we're putting boundaries within a relationship? Okay. Because it's not necessary. I mean, this is a self-exercise. This can also be a private exercise that it's not necessarily something that someone else always needs to know.
Well, and I think being able to gauge what are my needs in this as I'm setting this boundary. So there are two types. There's an internalized emotional boundary, and this can actually come up when working with people who might have narcissistic traits. I'm not going to share my need for you for a boundary because that might be taken advantage of, or that might be used against me. But I can still have internal emotional boundaries. And I might be able to now have choice and decide, how am I going to react? How am I going to engage in a conversation versus not? So the internalized emotional boundaries are very important. I may not have to disclose that to the other person. Let's say they do not have narcissistic traits, but I don't know if they are at a healthy place themselves with boundary setting. So it might not even behoove the relationship to engage in that dialogue. However, I still have choice, and I can set those internal boundaries by changing the subject in a conversation that might not feel healthy or feel safe, or perhaps meeting for coffee, but I won't be having lunch. Some internalized parameters that I know about and I'm aware of, but I don't have to have a conversation with the other person. And then the external boundaries might also be needed from time to time, where it is much more clear, more formal, something much more evident and obvious. So it's learning to use discernment on what tool to use, and learning to trust yourself that you can make those good decisions for yourself in those relationships.
So what would be advice for someone dealing with boundary pushback from a loved one? As we were just talking about, maybe somebody is choosing to create a boundary and the other person realizes it and notices it and says, you know what? I don't feel like that's kind, or they don't like it and they're going to let you know.
I love when this happens. This is a beautiful moment because, and Glennon Doyle references this often in her talks, when someone acts out after you have set a boundary, two things occur. You are seeing live time who was benefiting from the lack of boundary in the first place.
Okay, hold on.
Yes.
Whoa, pause.
Yes.
Say that one
Powerful.
more time. Yes.
When people act out as a result of you setting a boundary, it's a great indicator of who was benefiting from the lack of the boundary in the first place.
And how necessary the boundary is.
And that you are doing something right because that reaction that you're receiving is a great validation. Okay, this is exactly what I need to be doing because I'm interrupting our norm. I'm no longer participating in an unhealthy dynamic. I will not be utilizing dysfunctional tools and techniques in this relationship. And when you act out, that is a reminder to me, I have interrupted what was once working for you in an unhealthy way.
Yeah.
And I'll no longer participate. So acting out, the good sign. It's I'm now very aware that the boundary was necessary.
Yes. In some research I have done in my relationships within some of my family members, I feel overwhelmed by my own situation. I don't know that I have space and room for everyone else's.
And I think that learning to use discernment on what you can and cannot absorb in that moment. And then once I get to a place where perhaps I can test that out, and maybe that's not even your cup of tea or for you. Yeah. Perhaps you can find healing through other techniques. Some people will swear by support groups or sort of that group participation. Other people may find it in another venue, and that's fine, right? Healing is healing.
Yeah, it's your own personal. It's personal, right? Well, in the Al-Anon book, that boundaries are clearly a part of the tactics that they use, and trying that in my personal life, and then having and being met with very aggressive reactions to a boundary. Again, in my life, I feel like the brick in the face is what I need sometimes to finally get it. And that was a beautiful experience. Once it helped me understand how necessary the boundary is.
That's right.
And how bad the lack of boundaries had gotten and not even allowed me to be myself.
Right.
It was an amazing awareness.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So, okay, let's talk about the connection between self-worth and healthy boundaries.
So this is where fundamentally we have to have buy-in that we deserve to have the boundaries. We deserve to have healthy relationships. We deserve to be able to do the work and explore, where do I have enmeshment? Where do I have, chaos and crisis? Where do I have dysfunction? Where do I participate? What triggers me? What do I provide to relationships? Understanding that I'm worth that work.
Right? I mean, at the end of the day, no matter what, you're worth it.
We're worth it. And it's important, and it allows me to lean into safe and healthy relationships. If not, I'll stay safe.
Yeah.
But I will limit myself and who I can connect with.
Yeah. I think in this setting that it's a healthy version of deserve, not entitlement, but because you're human, you deserve the healthy relationship.
Right.
You deserve healthy self-worth, positive self-worth.
And learning that there is no we without me. So if I exclude my needs, if I exclude my wants and desires, my thought, my voice, there is no relationship. I must bring my healthy self to the table. You and I both mutually invest into that relationship. Yeah. We both deserve the healthy space that we can lean into.
Yeah. So sometimes in unhealthy relationships, and sometimes the other person might like it when you are not healthy or making good decisions because it makes them feel better about themselves or their bad decisions.
And that's when it's so important to take a look at your historical patterns. And might I be recreating old dynamics in this relationship because of the response that I'm getting when I'm wanting to show up healthier, with healthy boundaries, with healthier parameters in this relationship? If you're acting out as a response, that gives me an opportunity to reflect. Am I recreating old dynamics? Yeah. Is this a healthy dynamic? If I find that it is not, I have choice.
Yeah.
I have choice in that.
Right? I mean, really discerning what that boundary line looks like and the access to you. You have the right to create the access.
Absolutely. It's you and me, not you or me.
Yeah. And not or. Yes. Okay, so let's move into codependency, because sometimes these unhealthy relationships can be very codependent, and it's hard sometimes to realize that until a healthy boundary is set. How can we identify that codependent tendency?
When you start learning about secure attachments, you will start seeing this harmonious exchange between both people, and you will see a mutual investment. That allows us to see that we both are mutually investing in a healthy way. If it feels like it's another Southern term, cattywampus, if it feels as though I am parentified and or I am dependent on someone else, then we're likely in some enmeshed, blurred, codependent scenario. And so learning to unnormalize those things. When I become aware, though, lean into what does a safe, healthy dynamic look like in a relationship? Do I have those components in my relationships? Learn what does enmeshment look like? What does it mean? What does an enabler mean? What does it mean to be dependent on someone? Am I fostering someone's dependency on me? It can look very well-meaning. Ask me how I know, And so learning and understanding, what is my motivation behind what I'm doing?
Yeah.
Am I fostering a belief that you can treat me this way? Am I fostering bad behavior, unhealthy behavior, because of my fear of you leaving me?
Yeah.
Once you start evaluating your motivation behind your patterns, things will become clear.
Yeah. And fear is just an emotion too, right?
That's exactly right.
Because all too many times I think we are debilitated.
It feels true, but is it true?
Right.
And I'm worth taking a risk to find out, is this a healthy dynamic or not? Yeah. And then I have choice in that.
So let's shift into talking about boundary mistakes. So this is a lot of work and self-reflection on healthy boundaries. But what would you say you possibly see making mistakes with boundaries?
One of the most common mistakes I think I see is people hoping and wishing and praying that the other person will get the hint. What we really need to do when we're in those external boundary setting is being very clear, not vague. We don't need to hope that they will catch the hint. We want to be very clear, use I statements. When this happens, I feel blank. I need this. I commit to this. And so we're taking ownership of what our needs are. There's no blame or projection. This is exactly what I need. I'm sharing it with you. I am only responsible, by the way, for the delivery of this.
Yeah.
I'm not responsible for someone else's emotional experience or for their reactivity. I am responsible for the delivery.
I think sometimes we do feel responsible for their reaction.
Sure. And especially for people close up, our children, our partner, a coworker, a friend.
Yeah.
We want to clean that up.
Yes.
But they are human, and it is okay for them to have an emotional experience. We have to normalize that.
Yeah. Yeah. So how can therapy help someone that is struggling within that relational well-being piece of healthy boundaries?
Therapy is a good place, I think, to be able to recognize historical patterns, understand root causes, familial, otherwise, look at the impact of potential trauma, look at the impact of relationship dynamics, and understand what we learned along the way that has shaped the way we see ourselves in relationships. And so being able to understand those things, identify stuck points, belief systems, things that get in the way of healthy dynamics.
And as you said, it's a practice, right? This is a journey. This isn't just, okay, I'm going to do this once and it's either going to work, not work, and it's over.
The work is constant.
Yeah, the work is constant. Wrapping up, I think we've touched on so many beautiful emotional, messy things. But the reality is that there's very practical things that we can do to live in the messy and to move from the messy too.
Yes. Yes.
So is there one thing, if the people listening today walk away from this conversation with one piece of advice, one mindset shift, what would you say?
I think if we had one takeaway, I would want it to be that there is no healthy relationship without healthy boundaries. The end.
Period.
Across the board. And that you are worth exploring the dynamics to get you to those healthier, safer relationships.
So rewind, hit the back 15-second button or the back 30-second button and listen to that statement about 5 more times.
Yes.
Let it sink in.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's okay to hear that over and over again
Yeah.
until we really, really understand it.
You're worth the work.
Yeah.
You're worth the work.
Beth, thank you.
Thank you.
This has been a beautiful
I've loved it.
conversation. Appreciate you and your heart and your mind.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I appreciate you opening the space to talk about hard things.
Yeah. Well, remember, girl power here.
That's right.
Ladies, we're
Got
uniting.
this.
We're sharing it.
That's right.
Yeah. Thanks,
Each
Beth.
other. Thank you.